Have you ever asked yourself, do we follow Jesus because we love him, or because we've been taught to fear hell? Do we choose the good because it is good, or because we've been warned of punishment? From childhood, many of us are told, God is watching. Jesus will judge you. If you sin, you'll burn in hell. If you don't believe, you'll be cast into eternal fire. These warnings don't come as gentle guidance, but often as threats cloaked in religious language. Fear becomes our first theology. Hell becomes our first memory of God. And love? Love gets buried beneath the rubble of obedience by threat. We grow up not with open hearts, but with anxious souls, taught to behave not because it is right, but because we are afraid of what happens if we don't. And somewhere in all this noise, the real Jesus gets lost. When fear replaces Christ. Fear, when sown young, grows deep. It doesn't just sit in your thoughts. It takes root in your identity. You begin to believe, I am sinful, I am broken, I am deserving of wrath. And Jesus? He becomes the gatekeeper of heaven. Not a friend, not a savior, not love, but a judge waiting for you to trip. So we go to church not to commune, but to escape judgment. We read the Bible not to grow, but to avoid getting it wrong. We confess not out of contrition, but out of terror. And we do good not for the love of Christ, but out of fear of hell. But is that Christianity? Is that the gospel Jesus came to proclaim? The gospel was never a threat. Jesus did not come to scare us into heaven. He came to free us from sin, yes, but also from fear. Over and over he said, do not be afraid. Let not your hearts be troubled. Fear not, for I am with you. The Jesus of the Gospels is not holding a whip. He's washing feet. He's breaking bread with outcasts. He's weeping at the tomb of a friend. He's healing, forgiving, restoring. The cross was not a symbol of punishment. It was a symbol of love so deep that even death bowed down to it. So why have we replaced that Jesus with a terrifying version? Who counts sins like a tax collector and throws people into hell for not praying right? Can morality exist without fear of hell? The truth is, yes, it can. Yes, it does. Because real morality, true goodness, is not born from fear. It is born from love. Love your neighbor, not to escape hell, but because they are made in the image of God. Forgive, not because you're told to, but because you were first forgiven. Serve, not to earn heaven, but because Christ himself came to serve. What good is a heart that only loves out of fear? What kind of goodness vanishes when the threat is gone? A child who obeys just because he's afraid of punishment is not yet truly kind. He is cautious. And when the fear disappears, so might the kindness. Likewise, if you only follow Jesus because you're afraid of hell, then you've never really known Jesus. You've only met religion. The moral life without God? Some ask, if there is no God, would we still be good? And that's a terrifying question for many Christians, because we've been taught that goodness can't exist without him. But goodness is not something God dangles above us like a reward. It is something he placed within us, written on our hearts, breathed into our souls when he created us. There are people, even atheists, who live compassionately, truthfully, sacrificially. They love without fear. They give without reward. They act morally because they listen to the voice of conscience. That echoes something deeper than religion, something divine. And maybe, just maybe, that too is the voice of God, even if they don't call it that. Choosing Jesus from freedom, not fear. The truest Christianity is not about submission through terror. It is about transformation through love. Jesus does not demand obedience. He invites relationship. He doesn't say, follow me or I'll destroy you. He says, follow me, I will make you whole. He doesn't force salvation. He offers it, gently, freely, willingly. Real faith is not a deal. I'll be good so I don't go to hell. It is a surrender. I will love because I was first loved. And that love, it frees you from guilt, from shame, from the endless fear of never being enough. If Christ is love, why are we still so afraid? We must ask, have we built a Christianity that looks more like control than Christ? More like fear than faith? More like punishment than grace? Because if the God we preach makes people more anxious than free, more guilty than forgiven, more terrified than beloved, then we have not preached the gospel at all. Jesus said, I came that they may have life, and have it abundantly, not a life of trembling obedience, but of bold, fearless love. What if heaven wasn't promised? What if hell wasn't threatened? Ask yourself, honestly, quietly, without pretending anyone's watching, if heaven were never promised, would you still follow Jesus? Would you still walk with him through the dust of your doubts? Sit at his feet just to listen? Let his words challenge your pride and soften your wounds? Or is your discipleship a transaction, a spiritual insurance policy you cling to, just in case the stories are true? Would you still kneel before him? If there were no golden streets awaiting you at the end, would you still serve the broken, still forgive the unworthy, still pour out your love, if it earned you nothing, nothing but the joy of giving itself, because maybe that's the only kind of love that can be called Christ-like? And if there were no hell, if there were no threat of hell, no gnashing of teeth, no lake of fire, no eternal punishment, would you still be kind? Would you still tell the truth when lying was easier? Would you still choose compassion over convenience, peace over pride, honor over indulgence? Or are you only resisting sin because you're afraid of the consequences? Because fear may correct behavior, but it cannot transform a heart. Jesus never said, be good or I'll punish you. He said, abide in me. He said, love one another as I have loved you. Not because you'll burn otherwise, but because love is the only thing that lasts. Because love is who he is and who he calls you to become. And if no one saw your goodness, if no one was watching, no eyes of heaven, no applause of men, would you still live in love? Would you still stop for the stranger? Still sit beside the grieving? Still choose humility over ego if there were no reward? Not in this life and not in the next? Would you still be gentle if no one praised you for it? Would you still forgive if your enemy never changed? Would you still speak truth if it cost you everything? Because that's the moment where true integrity is born, when goodness flows from your soul, not for applause, not for reward, but because it is right, because it is love, because it is Jesus alive in you. Maybe that's when your faith becomes real. Maybe faith is not found in how many verses you've memorized, or how often you attend church, or how loudly you rebuke sin. Maybe faith becomes real when you choose love without leverage, when you stand at the crossroads of easy and good, and you choose good, not because of what's at the finish line, but because you trust the one walking beside you. When you forgive the one who broke you, not to earn heaven, but because Christ forgave you. When you give sacrificially, not for favor from God, but because God has already given you everything. That's when your faith stops being superstition and starts being transformation, the follower Jesus longs for. Jesus didn't call the brave. He didn't recruit the righteous. He didn't ask for those with perfect theology or polished performances. He said, follow me. And he meant, come close, know me, let me change you from the inside out. He longs not for servants afraid of the whip, but for friends who walk in love. Not for those who obey because they're scared, but those who love because they've been set free. Not for souls bargaining for heaven, but for hearts burning with compassion. Because they've tasted grace, a faith worth living for, Fear may get you into church, but it won't keep you in love. Guilt may silence your rebellion, but it won't grow your soul. Only love can do that. Only grace can do that. And Jesus? He's not interested in your fear. He's not building an army of anxious rule followers. He's building a kingdom of love, where mercy is the law, where forgiveness is the culture, where freedom is the anthem. So the question becomes, will you love him even if there's no promise of reward? Will you follow him even if it costs you everything and gains you nothing? Will you trust him not because you're afraid not to, but because you're free to? Because that is the only faith worth living for. And maybe, just maybe, it's also the only kind of faith that can change the world.